Well, with more on this significant move in Canada's pandemic strategy, we're now reaching out to Earl Brown. He is a professor of biochemistry, microbiology, and immunology with the University of Ottawa. Professor Brown, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here, Michael.
Now, in listening to the announcement today, the government justifies this change in strategy by arguing that the Omicron wave has largely passed, that vaccination rates are relatively high, hospitalization and death rates relatively low. What's your response to that argument in dropping these regulations?
Well, these regulations were put in to protect Canadians, and it was largely a position to look at our border, to harden our border, to detect viruses in people who possibly might have brought it in through infections. So we're late in the pandemic. Are we over it? Are we almost over it? We can argue a little bit, but we're nearing the end of it, hopefully. And we've gone through 7 waves now, and most of us are vaccinated. The burden on the healthcare system is lessening. We still have 4,000 to 5,000 people in hospital. It's not gone away, but we're handling it. With vaccination, the seriousness of the disease for most Canadians is comparable to the risk we have with other infections we deal with year in and year out.
Mm-hmm. So you're comfortable with this dropping of regulations, this ending of the order in council?
Well, yes. So border restrictions are largely pretty ineffective at keeping viruses out of your country. That being said, there's also a surveillance aspect. Do you see certain people are infected in the first variant, say, possibly coming in? So there's some value to it, but that value decreases with time. We do have surveillance on the ground, even if we stop surveilling as much on the border. It's not like we're closing our eyes. And there's a certain timeliness. We have to get along with life somewhat, but it's not ignoring risk. It's dealing with risk. We've got vaccination programs. We've got more drugs to treat people who get serious infections. So we are able to cope much better than the early stages. So I would agree that it's time to lessen the restrictions at the border.
Mm-hmm. Now, in addition, and I think this was the part that was up for debate last week, was whether or not the government would also add to it an end to the requirement of wearing a mask while on a plane or on a train. What do you think of the masking regulations being dropped in those instances?
Well, I think it goes hand in hand with just the lessening of the burden of the disease on Canadians. But that being said, a mask is a fairly convenient way of decreasing spread of infection, especially in closed places. So whereas the government may not mandate it now, they're still recommending it. And I wholeheartedly endorse that if you're in with many people, especially if you're at high risk, use your protections. A mask is still very good at decreasing the rate of infection.
Mm-hmm. Can you help explain something, though? Because on the one hand, we hear this great chorus of people saying that, the numbers are improving, vaccination rates are up, and therefore we can drop this order in council. But on the other side, there are those that push back or at least have a question as to the numbers, because we were told that there would be an increase in infections in the fall, and we're really just starting the autumn now. Is it too early to be dropping this order in council if we are expecting the numbers to go up in the coming weeks?
Well, that's an interesting point. And yeah, we're entering the winter. That's always a respiratory virus infection season. And so we've got our flus and our RSVs and other viruses. We also have COVID-19 in the mix now. So it will be pushing against us as those other infections are. And we are in fairly decent shape to deal with that, in that 85% of Canadians have 2 doses, which keeps you out of the hospital somewhat, but won't protect you against infection. Lots of people have 3 and 4 doses, which is better at stopping you getting infected in the first place. So we do have a certain amount of immunity in the population. We've got medicines and treatments. So yes, we're coming into cold and flu season. COVID's in there too. It may be a fairly busy season because we've had 2 years of people not getting those infections. Therefore, we're not carrying on the antibodies, those recurrent infections. So it may be a pretty active flu, COVID-19, and respiratory virus season. The hospitals are getting back to normal-ish, though they're under stress. I think at some point you have to decrease restrictions if they don't give you enough value. And right now, they're not detecting enough infections at the border to say it's worth keeping doing that to protect Canadians. We'll still be looking at the virus in the country, looking at variants. The virus continues to vary. There's a new variant that's increasing in Europe and elsewhere. It's a sublineage of Omicron BA4, but it acts much like that virus, so maybe a bit more of the same. So yes, we're proceeding with infections. COVID-19 is still there, but less of a burden as it was before.
Mm-hmm. So what do you say then to Canadians who either they intend to travel by train or by plane, or at the very least just concerned about this change in pandemic policy? What do you say in terms of a best path forward?
Well, I'm saying for those who are going to travel by plane or train, before you were mandated by the government to mask and have a vaccine, I would recommend you still have both of those going forward, but it's your personal decision as to whether you board with a vaccine acquired previously or whether you wear a mask. And I would encourage people to wear a mask because we just talked about the fact we're going to enter the winter season where all sorts of respiratory viruses transmit. So protect yourself with a mask. It's a personal decision, and those at higher risk are going to take that decision more strictly, and those who are at less risk will have different considerations.
Earl Brown, thank you so much for the time, and really thanks for pushing through the wind that's blowing your computer right now as well. Thank you for this.
Good to talk, Michael.
And good to talk to you. Take care.